Hi everyone, it's Sarah and Ruth here from Altogether ND. And for people that don't know, my name is Sarah. I have two diagnosed autistic children, both still school age. My oldest has just done her GCSEs and is waiting results. Her journey through education has not been linear at all. She's missed a couple of years here and there and done alternative provisions. My youngest has been out of school for 2 years and he's transitioning into an alternative provisions school and is going into year 7. That's a bit about me, and obviously I do have a lot of experience working within the local authority supporting neurodivergent families. Over to Ruth.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruth. My experience is fairly similar to Sarah's. I work in the local authority still part-time. I've got neurodivergent children, I've got neurodivergent grandchildren, and because my children are all older, they went through the education system, but I can see now that it potentially didn't benefit some of them. I'm neurodivergent myself, so can understand what it's like, one, to be a neurodivergent parent and how that parenting affects us, but also hopefully I can understand how my children and how my grandchildren feel and can make adaptations and adjustments so that we can all function at our best.
Yeah. And I think obviously this time of year is summer holidays, and the big question is, how are your holidays going? I think working and living it from our experiences is very simplified, absolutely, but it tends to be either no school, brilliant, anxiety removed, or lack of routine, and they struggle with that. For me personally, it doesn't change because too much for me. I just find a real personal pressure on myself to do more because it's summer holidays, but also struggle with that because obviously places are busy and my children don't cope very well with that. So there's a lot of pressure to be doing things, I feel, because it's summer holidays, which is bizarre because particularly for my youngest, he's been out of school for 2 years. So I've done all these kind of things while they've been quiet, which is a conversation Ruth and I have had recently on how hard it is. I mean, I know you've got homeschooled grandchildren, haven't you, Ruth?
Yeah.
And I wonder how their routines changed. Or has it not?
Do you know what? I'm not entirely sure. I mean, a lot of the homeschooling, I think, goes on how regulated one of them is in particular, and you know what can be achieved at any given time. I do know that you know I've been able to see them a bit more in the sense that you know we've been able to have later nights and things like that because of the pressures off. And like you know camping in the garden and going off in the motorhome and you know things like that. So that's been great, building in those you know other experiences and experiences that aid regulation, that aid the you know the brain, the nervous system to be calm. I think it's a really interesting conversation, isn't it? How do we all manage that?
Yeah, because you know there's so much. I think social media doesn't help, does it? I think that obviously we know social media puts so much. I think that puts that pressure on me.
The irony is that we're putting a social media.
Yeah, we're on social media. But I go on Facebook and I see my friend and go this, and I know for my children they wouldn't manage that. Yes, they like to go out and do something, but if I jam pack their holiday, my oldest particularly would burn out very quickly. And so it's balancing that between, yes, let's go out and have a good time and enjoy things, but let's give them a day or two then to regulate in between. And it's difficult because all families are different. There are also going to be those children out there that really do need that structure and that routine. And it's how it's always that balance, isn't it? And I'm in that place this year with Michael, my youngest, on when do I start thinking about transitioning into the school year? How quickly do you do that countdown? Because for a lot of children, there's a lot of anxiety involved, and you want them to be able to enjoy the holiday. But
especially when they're transitioning into a different provision. Yeah, and especially when you transition into a different provision, whether that's mainstream or alternative provision, it's it's something to think about, isn't it?
Because I know with my daughter Billy, if she had incredible anxiety around school. Obviously, Ruth, you know the level of anxiety she had, particularly when she was still in mainstream, and she worried anyway. And once it was a difficult balance between, particularly when she was younger, when she probably didn't have quite the same understanding of time and weeks and all those kind of things. If she suddenly asked me, well, it's next week, whoa, the blow up would be massive, because suddenly she wasn't ready for it. But I also didn't want the holiday to be all consuming of the build up. Do you know what I mean? It's finding that balance. And I think a lot of families struggle with that.
So, Sarah, on that note then, what kind of strategies did you use? And actually knowing what you know now, because obviously the children are so much older and we've learned so much more in the last, well, goodness knows how many years. What things worked for her, but what kind of things do you know about now that would have worked even better?
In terms of getting her into school and out of school, when she was, so she did nursery and she did fine, but she never did full time. And the first kind of language she would use in reception was, it's too long. And obviously now, with my understanding and her able to articulate herself, what I've come to realise was holding the mask was too long. And she was come home. I remember by Friday, I barely would get dinner in her and she'd be asleep by 4 o'clock. She was absolutely exhausted. What I wished I'd done then had been a bit, I'd understand, would have been a more gradual transition into school. I think there was a lot of pressure, and as parents we are, to get them in. Transitioning after holidays through primary, I always made sure I had a really clear transition at the end of the summer term. So I went to school and said, look, we know that she's going to find this hard. I need to know exactly what that first morning's going to look like because she needed to know exactly what, so she knew who she was going to go and meet at the door. It would be her favourite, most trusted person. I was very fortunate she had a very positive relationship with like the emotional support teacher, and what that transition would look like. If I could get that first week nailed, that would also help. I think schools are increasingly good at it now, but having that transition booklet for her to look at for the school holidays. And actually my son's been given one now for his new school, so there's a picture of his teacher, his TAs, and we keep revisiting it every so often. In terms of the countdown, it is very, very hard. As she got older, her understanding of time, but when she was younger, I did, particularly summer holidays, not talk about school. And to be fair, that did carry on. I didn't tend to initiate those conversations because I didn't want to, peak that anxiety. But if she wanted to speak to me, obviously that would be fine. I mean, I don't know if you've come across any good routines with, obviously, professionally and with yours, because I know obviously back when your children were younger, it was a completely unknown, well, not completely unknown, but far.
When my children, yeah, these words, certainly the word neurodivergent wasn't even around then. Nobody thought of that word. There was the autism was known, but it was known in the very traditional only boys and that kind of thing. So yeah, there was no language. There was no readily available information, which is really interesting now, isn't it? I think to me that's the biggest difference now, is that we can find out, but so transition. So when my kids were little, and I'm going back to the 90s and 2000s when my kids were in school, summer holidays would just be free time. I mean, back then I worked in schools as well, so the pressure was completely off. We could build our own routine. And thinking about it, we used to build in a lot of unexpected, a lot of flexibility. Now, looking back, for some of them that may be good, and for some of them that might not have been so good. But we all did it, and I suppose in that respect, it has supported us all in our adult lives, because things don't always go to plan. So we'd kind of learnt those things. But I think back then other than, say, about 4 days before, you were getting a bedtime routine in and making sure you had the uniform and making sure you had the clothes, the shoes and what have you. Back then, nothing else was known. Nothing else was done. Now
I mean,
I
I
would do
think
it
back to
very,
when I
very
started.
differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think masking is, in this bad scheme of things, a fairly new understanding of the impact a mask has on a child, adult mental health is
Yeah,
huge.
and that
And
understanding is still being developed. We're still
yeah,
learning about that.
yeah, absolutely. For my daughter, that is a massive. She masks so strong that I could. It's, as a parent, and I know Ruth, you've seen it. It's weird. I still always go back to that story of her wanting to walk home from school, and I was reluctant because she can be away with the fairies. She's off. There was just one road she had to cross, and I was like, well, I'll meet you at the road because I just wasn't confident. And as she walked towards me, she wasn't walking like my daughter. Wasn't holding herself like my daughter. She wasn't speaking. And what I realized, she was mimicking the people around her. And it was that point I realized how hard that must be for her on a daily basis. And like in adults, we do it. I think, but I think as us as adults, Ruth, I know, I talked about I think you reach an age
You do?
where you don't be, you're not
And
bothered by it. But
no, and you have life experiences as well. That you
absolutely.
whether you consciously make that decision that like me or not, this is who I am. I'm not going to bend anymore, or I'm in.
Mm.
And when I say, well, I'm not going to bend anymore, I mean I'm not going to mask anymore. I'm not going to people please anymore. I am not going to read your mind so that I can fit in. I'm not, I'm happy in my own skin these days. But it's really interesting for children, isn't it? I mean, I think, and I was talking to you about this briefly the other day, Sarah, that one of my granddaughters, she can swim, but it's early stages of swimming. But what she really wants to be able to do is do a handstand and a roly poly in the water and those sorts of things. And those physical movements would really support her cognitive development in many ways, as physical movement does for all of us, but for her. And because the pool was very quiet, it was a beautiful day. Everybody must have been on the beach, and it was very quiet. And me and her mum were with her. And because she had supporting and encouraging people with her, she was having a go. Whereas when the pool is busy, she's not. She's masking. I can see it.
Yeah.
And she's
I
not.
think it's difficult.
It's the confidence as well, isn't it? I think we have to have a certain amount of confidence to not mask. And as children, particularly neurodivergent children, even now, with as much as everybody knows and the support that's out there or not, we know it's variable. If you've got that relationship with somebody, if you've got a positive, trusting, supportive, safe relationship with somebody that's encouraging, your confidence is going to build. You are going to learn about yourself. You're going to accept yourself more. You're going to not feel the need to mask as much. And it's an interesting concept.
Yeah. I think for teenagers, we all know it's a difficult time of life, and that need and that desire to fit in means that mask, we've come across it. Obviously, I've come across it, my daughter, and professionally. So many of these teenagers miss burnout, but also how vulnerable does it make these teenagers that mask because of people pleasing? They're going to, put themselves potentially in really
It's
unsafe
scary.
situations, potentially,
You're
because,
talking about my teenage years. It's scary.
yeah,
And when you're living it, you don't know any different. But as an adult, and when you understand all of those things that did or didn't happen to you, or what have you, and what you were kind of committing yourself to. I'm not sure that that's the right word, but it certainly, as an adult, felt like that's what I was doing to fit in. Because as we know, teenagers, that it's another stage of development in their brain, and it's time where they kind of leave the safety of their family home and their family, and they find new people, they find a new pack. And to find a new pack, we have to fit in to a certain extent, obviously. And for neurodivergent children of any age, even people, adults, teenagers, regardless, those social norms, shall we put it that way, expectations, the neurotypical things that we're talking about, which I'm not entirely sure what they are, because obviously I'm not neurotypical, but it's interesting, and my head is put an awful lot of information in, and I can't line it all up to get it out.
I mean, it's different. I'm going through this process, obviously, with my daughter at the minute, 16, and obviously I've been with her on her journey through education, obviously, as a mum, and I've attended meetings, multiple meetings, EHCPs, IEPs, and have been, obviously, as she's got older, I've always brought her voice into the meetings, and as she's got older and she felt able to, she would attend. But trying now, she's obviously going to college. Of course, she needs a bit more independence, but because of her journey to education, because she missed so much, because she finds social situations difficult, she isn't going out and being social. To then try and see her go off into this kind of pre-adult, transitioning, it makes me very nervous as her mum watching it. So I'm
going to be a lot of new things for her.
I can feel it, the anxiety for me, let alone her. Although she's very excited, and I would never hold her back, but it's also making sure she's safe and got those,
and it's having those conversations.
Her.
Absolutely, it's having those conversations, isn't it, to prepare her for situations that may happen, and have scripts so that she knows what to say if somebody says something, or she knows what to do if somebody does something, asks her to do something, whatever. And that could be on any level, obviously. Even should we go to the pub for lunch? That's a consideration. And I think actually sometimes it's those lower level, what we would consider to be lower level, but actually can have the bigger impact, in the sense that, come on, we've got lunchtime now. Let's go into the city and let's do whatever. Let's go McDonald's. Let's go to the pub. Let's go to, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
I think the things we have to. Sorry, I've got a fidget, everybody, just in case you see something pink in the film. We have to consider the impact that then has on us for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week, and it's a shame in a sense, because it's kind of limiting us, isn't it? What can we do? But actually, if we've got that self-awareness, and we can build that stamina, we can build that resilience, we don't have to always be how we are. Everybody has brain plasticity, so we can change, what's happening in our brain. Obviously, there's limits to that, but that's no different to any other human on the planet. So, that doesn't make us stand out in any way, shape, or form. We all, every single person has amazing abilities in their own way. So, it's all of it is going to be interesting for her in particular, isn't it? This journey she's got. And I mean, and even, I know we've discussed, is she going to be able to manage it? And if not, what support is involved, and getting that in place, having those conversations beforehand, so that if what happens, you know what to do, rather than, because I expect there's potentially a lot of parents out there that their children are going to be transitioning, even if it's within the same school, but it's going to be into a different year. it's thinking about, okay, so if something does happen, and we're not catastrophizing, we're not thinking of the worst, we're just, that kind of just above baseline, so that we're prepared for, and then that makes the conversations easier with other professionals involved, for instance. It also helps for us all to realize that we're all trying our best to support within the limitations that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, like we've come across before, when a child, teenager, anyone really, that is accessing an environment, for example, school, and potentially it's not going very well, those negative kind of pathways become quite cemented quite quickly, don't they? And so potentially, the longer that goes on, the harder it is sometimes to reverse it. There's a lot more hard work at the beginning of that process. And you might, as a parent in school, put all these kind of support structures and strategies in place to stop that negative thing happening again. But for many neurodivergent children, it takes a lot to
I think you've raised a really important point. So what happens in the brain when we learn anything new, or when we have a new experience, when anything happens around us, to us, words, whatever that situation may be, it fires different. If it's a new thing, it fires different synapses in the brain. So we're making a pathway. And as we all know, I mean, for the adults that are watching this, if you drive a car, I bet 9 times out of 10 you're driving around and you think, oh, how did I get here? It's become such an automatic behavior. Same with walking. We don't think about how we stand upright, how we balance, all the complex things that are going on when we walk. We don't think about that anymore. It's a really strong pathways, and those really strong pathways make things easy for the brain to do. And so when we start forming, I don't like to use the word negative, but we all know what it means. When we start to form a pathway that can have more of a negative impact on our lives, for example, it can trigger the fight-flight response or anxiety, things like that. The more that situation happens, the stronger that pathway is going to be. That will become a default, just as walking, just as driving a car, etc., etc. The stronger the pathway, the more of a default it becomes. We can't get rid of that default. What we have to do is to replace that with positive pathways, or positive behaviors that form pathways. And the more you practice something, the more that becomes stronger. And we all know the saying, practice makes perfect. I've kind of adapted that a bit. I get it. But actually what practice makes is pathways. It makes pathways in our brain. When I'm working with people to explain that, we've really digressed. But anyway, when I'm working with people to explain that, I draw a picture of just a rectangle and say this is a field, and there's a gate up here and a gate down here. If somebody walked down through that field, you could turn around and you could tell that something had been through, but not all the way. All the grass, all the wheat, whatever it is you're walking through, all springs back up. But if you did that 2 or 3 times every day, and even more people joined in, whatever, you would soon notice that a pathway is forming in that field. Now, we all know as well that where there are pathways, whether that's public footpaths or what have you, that are well trodden, they would take a long time because the ground has been, compacted, etc., etc. But they would take a long time for nature to reclaim that. Now, think about that when we're talking about pathways in our brain. Because the more you do something, the more you're making that pathway evident, stronger, more of a default. And you think of the amount of time that it would take to get rid of that one. So what we do is we don't try to get rid of it. We replace it with a different one. So we would then use a different gate, go into a different gate, and we would form a new pathway, but of a thought process or a behaviour or whatever it may be that that is more desirable, that makes us feel better, that makes us, as in the individual that's it's going on in their brain. Yes, we have to behave in a certain way because we live in a society. However, compliance is a funny thing, isn't it? There's some things that we do have to comply with, but we shouldn't behave in a way just because somebody said so, unless it's something that we want to do, unless it's something that's beneficial, that's yes, there's the right way to do things. There's I'm trying to not put words in people's heads, if you see what I mean, but that and there's so my brain's just gone off on another tangent because that's what it does. But we've also got to remember that people behave well if they can, if they're regulated, then
yeah, absolutely.
And that's an interesting one when we think of school holidays. So that transition in and out of school holidays and things. So if we're regulated, we can do that. So what do we do? What do parents do? What do families do? What do individuals do to help themselves within those transitions? Because I know, Sarah, we've had a conversation not long after the summer holidays started, actually, because we'd both seen different social media posts.
Where children have been.
Go on.
Where children have been, parents will say, "Oh, my child's been a nightmare," and then I'm not taking them to the beach because I don't punish bad behaviour. And I think there's very, very few children that want to misbehave and want to get in trouble. I mean, there is psychology obviously around attention, but typically children don't want to be badly behaved, and often these children are dysregulated or not regulated enough. And actually by regulating them, you'll get an improvement in behaviour. But, it's something Ruth and I've learned in our jobs and obviously in our personal lives, what works for our families. But, it's the same in schools. How many times I've attended meetings and, been told, oh, the child's naughty, or are they just not regulated? And actually, when I was able to, you did do the same job, we go in and say, right, let's do this. Let's regulate the child. And actually, 99% of the times, you would see a vast improvement of behaviour. And it's just...
And a lot of the time, all sometimes they need is an adult that accepts them for who they are. And actually, as we should all be doing anyway, putting the child in the centre, but it doesn't always happen, is actually thinking, okay, what does this child need? Where are they at? What's happening for them at the moment? And what can we do to help them? It's simple. It's very simple. And I always say, the amount of time that it takes to deal with a child that's dysregulated, that's fight flight, their nervous system is heightened, the amount of time it takes to I'm going to use the word to traditionally deal with that situation, takes an awful long time, and they don't regulate during that process. However, if we just spent 10 minutes, say, let's go out, let's run around, let's get that physical, repetitive, rhythmical movement in that reduces the cortisol out of your system. Sometimes 10 minutes is all it takes for everything to then be reset.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because even when you've got these masking children, they're dysregulated, I can speak from past experience. I know my son would never misbehave in a classroom. He masks, but that doesn't mean he's regulated by any sense of means. And he was quite good at articulating to me that when he was in that situation, and he said, my body felt horrible, his brain, to try and regulate itself, would go to his favourite topic, whether that would be Star Wars. So now in his head, he's no longer in the lesson. He's gone somewhere else in his head because outside he looks fine, but that's regulated. And so he would miss a lot of schooling. He would miss a lot of the input, but of course he also didn't want to stand out. So then he wouldn't put his hand up afterwards and go, I don't know what I'm doing. So he would sit there and he missed so much work, but he used to say his brain wouldn't allow him to listen. But really, if he wasn't a masculine child, he would have become visually very dysregulated and potentially seen as being naughty. But his mask was so strong that it just all went internally.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of this, we mask to fit in because we're scared. We're scared we're not going to fit in. We're scared we're not going to have a pack. We're scared we're not going to have a society to look after us, basically. It's a very primitive, part of our brain. It's a very primitive kind of behavior, but we still have that. Some are heightened more than others. But what's really interesting as well is that our brains know how to regulate.
Yeah.
Because of how we live and because of the constraints, basically, we literally have 4 walls around us now if we live in a house. Whereas years ago, we would live in a, I'm talking millions of years ago or whatever that number is, we would live in a cave or some sort of a shelter, that we would just build. We always had space to move. And whereas now we don't, we have doors and we have windows. We can't just, particularly as a child, you could live on a main road, you could live in a block of flats, you can't just run out. And so those behaviors come out in a different way. And all it is that the brain is trying to regulate. It's trying to get back to that state of homeostasis that it functions at its best. It's an interesting one. Look at the behaviors that come out. See it as a language. See it as a language. What's it telling us? What's it communicating? If somebody's, I don't know, bouncing off the beds or the furniture, okay, so they need to jump. They need to physically move. They need to jump. Is it that they need to run? Let's incorporate those things into daily life.
Yeah.
Because
I know, Ruth,
you're regulating your brain. It's play.
It is play. And going on, me and you've had discussion, a lot of people, we see it on the news, we see it, in the social media about this rise in diagnosis. And I know, I've spoken to you about it a lot, but we have changed childhoods. We have changed how we live it, particularly in the last, 10 years with social media, phones, the way they've developed. And I know you told me about a fact recently about historically how much time humans spent outdoors compared to now. And it's,
I can't remember the number, but it was up in the 80s, 90%.
Yeah. And again, that goes with what you were just saying about not being outside as much, not having as much physical movement as we used to have, because people are stationary. They're on their phones, they're on watching TV or on a PlayStation, whatever that is, because that's what society is now. And we're not blaming children. We've changed childhoods. Children aren't naturally regulating like we used to as children, even back in the 90s, 80s.
No,
we were running around. And
I drove through a really dense housing estate one evening a few weeks ago. It was about 6:30, 7 o'clock. So, most tea times are over by then. Beautiful day, obviously. We've had beautiful weather. It was, broad daylight, obviously, because it's summer at the moment, and there was not a child to be seen. And it broke my heart.
So, yeah. And, we're not blaming, this isn't, but you can see where potentially when I was at school, I'm not diagnosed, potentially I am. I think I am. But my childhood was very active. I was always outside. I would come home from school. There was a pack of friends that lived in my back lane. And we'd always go home from school, meet you at 4 o'clock by the lamppost. That's where we met. And we would play till tea time, run in, have tea and back out again. So you could see how regulating that was. Naturally, I didn't know what I was doing. It was what I was doing. They just don't do that anymore. And my children the same. Mine don't do that anymore. But it's a really important part of childhood, isn't it?
I saw, I'm not sure if it was on the BBC News app a few weeks ago, and there's I can't remember what they're calling the scheme, but there's a scheme where roads are closed like during certain hours, so it's a safe space for children to go and play. I think Bristol was one. I think was this somewhere. It was somewhere up north. I want to say Leeds, but I don't think it was Leeds. But and what an amazing idea, because life is different. There's how many more cars are there on the road? Generally most households, both parents work. They have to these days. You haven't got that. Come home from school, throw your school bag in the door. I'm right. Have a drink, have a biscuit, whatever. I'm going out to play, kind of thing. And with that adult at home. And different adults in the street. There's always eyes on, or not, or whatever it was. But
absolutely,
it was safety in numbers and all of those things. And it's but yes, we were all doing those physical movements that regulate the brain.
Yeah, and so is that why we're seeing a rise in children unable to manage mainstream school? I think it does play an important part in it, because obviously this isn't new. Yes, our understanding is increasing all the time, but neurodiversity isn't new. I mean, I look at my own grandparents. My granddad's got an incredible mathematical brain, incredible. But he's had shredded wheat every morning for breakfast for about 50-something years. He wears the same colour shirt every single day. My dad potentially is, so it hasn't just appeared.
It's not just
been
appeared.
there.
And if you go back to early man, the skills that neurodivergent people were, they wouldn't have survived without them.
No.
You needed people to think outside the box. Oh my goodness, would we have discovered, or would we have been able to have made, I don't know, weapons out of stone or early metal, or all sorts? Who worked out how to build a shelter? It's all a team effort. We all need all of our brains, every single one of us, to contribute to these sorts of things.
Absolutely.
If
they say
Silicon
Valley.
What were you saying?
They say Silicon Valley, isn't it? We wouldn't have mobile phones like we have now without neurodiversity. Most of the people there are neurodivergent.
Oh, absolutely.
Out there. But history,
Einstein, all those people that we talk about, that we learn about. It's but inclusivity is the key, and not inclusive as in, so like you were saying about your son just now, about when things were getting a bit too much when he was in a classroom, and in his head he would go off into Star Wars or Doctor Who or whatever, Sharks, or whichever one it was at the time, and he's in the classroom, but he's not included in the learning because his brain won't allow him, because of the environment. And that's another big conversation, isn't it, that we can open up at some point. But
but maybe that is, we do a podcast on the education.
I need to point out that we started by asking people how the summer holidays were, and we've covered a million other.
Yes, but please comment if you see this video. Let us know. But maybe, and if you want to do, and if you want us to do a podcast on a particular subject, please list it in the comments, and we will look at them. And we will try and keep on track. So I think you end it there for that part.
Yeah, I was just going to say that as well. We're doing this again now. We, as everybody sees, we will digress. That's just what happens. But we learn a lot through the process, I like to think. But hopefully this video gives everyone a kind of clue as to some of the things that we know and understand, and how we can support people, etc., etc. But yeah, it's been really good. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you for watching.